Wednesday's the day that the table read happens and the sketches that are going to make it to the show are selected. And that morning we got a call being like, come on over to the table read, you're going to direct something on Friday. So it was really like, it was probably the craziest week of my life.
You're listening to the Creatives Off Script podcast, hosted by Assemble, a podcast where we speak to leading producers and directors to learn their personal stories of success, as well as the insider knowledge of the process and culture within their companies. I'm your host, Nate Watkin, and today we're speaking with Hannah Levy, a director for Saturday Night Live who is now repped by Tool of North America. Hannah has written and directed sketches for the likes of Billie Eilish and Kim Kardashian, and now has her first film in development with Paramount. In this episode, Hannah tells us the story of getting signed on to direct at SNL and takes us through their chaotic creative development and production processes that happen every single week, including tools and techniques Hannah personally uses to visualize and direct her material. Welcome to our show, Hannah.
Thanks, Nate.
So I always love to start the show just learning about your origin story, and would love to hear just a brief description of your childhood and what you dreamed of being when you grew up.
Yeah, I grew up in suburban New Jersey, like the Philly suburbs, not the New York suburbs. It's a very important Jersey distinction to the Jersey heads out there. But I was kind of always interested in TV. I love TV. TV was just like a huge part of my childhood. Watching 30 Rock, watching Scrubs. Some of those NBC Thursday nights were like a huge part of my week. And I think that plus some of the kind of silliest comedies of that time, most importantly, Austin Powers, were like very defining to me. And I think without fully knowing, it was like, oh, I want to make stuff like that. And it's kind of funny because as I, got into high school and then college, I knew that I wanted to pursue film and TV stuff. And, but then I found myself in these film classes surrounded by, a lot of film bros who were like, Blade Runner is awesome. And so I was like, for a time I was like, yeah, Blade Runner is awesome. But actually what I think is really cool is Austin Powers, So I think, for me, a lot of those, I sort of started in a place, kind of tried to like fit in with the film bros, and then sort of accepted internally that, no, Austin Powers is my North Star spiritually. So yeah, that was kind of the early days. I knew I wanted to do comedy and film. In college, I went to Brown, and I kind of got involved in like the film festival there, and the TV station, which I would put in hard quotes. And then I was kind of missing this like comedy side of things, and I decided to apply for this program in Chicago where it's sort of like a semester abroad, but you're in Chicago, you're taking classes at Second City full time. And so I did that my senior year, and I kind of fell in love with the comedy scene in Chicago specifically. It sort of felt like a place where it was a little bit less professionally focused than like New York or LA, and people were kind of just there trying things out. So after I graduated college, I kind of knew that I wanted to go back to Chicago. And after like a brief stint in New York, my first job out of college was in New York. I was working for Huffington Post and putting together like Vine compilations and like other just kind of like video mashups. It was like 2014, and that was sort of the age of video mashups. And I didn't enjoy it too much, and I kind of decided to cut it off and just go for it in Chicago, and just try to figure things out. But I realized I kind of went beyond childhood. Were there any other childhood questions that you had, or should I just keep going?
Yeah, no, I think you covered it. And I love Chicago. So good choice. Good choice. And I think at least in the earlier stages of your career, you were working at The Onion and Funny or Die.
Hmm.
And so how did you get connected there, and what was that experience like?
Well, yeah. So when I first moved to Chicago, I had no job, and I uh, I was like, I'm going to get a day job, and then I'll take classes. I'll take sketch classes. I moved in with a friend of mine from that comedy program, who's still a close friend of mine, and we were kind of, working on stuff together. And so I just started applying to jobs, and I kept getting rejected from like donut shops and coffee shops and everything. And I was like, well, this isn't looking good. But I finally got a gig working at the Grubhub customer service call center. And so I would do that from 3 to midnight with Monday and Tuesday off. And then I was taking sketch classes. And then I had learned about an internship at The Onion that I applied for and then was rejected from because I was apparently too qualified, because I just had some working experience and I was out of college at that point. And the people who ran the internship, or the video team at The Onion, reached out to me a little bit later to say, hey, we have this fellowship program. Would you apply? And so I did apply. It was one of the more fun and also kind of intimidating job processes in my life, because first of all, it was like my first opportunity to kind of get paid to do the thing that I wanted to do. So the stakes felt high, but it was like a really process oriented job interview where they took a video that was already on the Onion site down, and then they shared all the footage that they shot for that video, and then you had to like cut together your own version of it, and like kind of add stock footage and music, and like you just had to, basically they were testing whether you understood the tone of The Onion. So from there, I kind of like made it to a round of finalists, and then got this fellowship, and it was like I ended up working at The Onion for almost 2 years, doing videos for The Onion and then doing videos for Clickhole. And it was like a really, really great experience. It was like kind of like comedy grad school, maybe. It was really fun. We had no money at all. And especially on the Clickhole side, Clickhole is kind of a website that parodies the internet. And at that time, 2014, 2015, it was like BuzzFeed and BuzzFeed lists and Upworthy and inspirational videos and tabletop recipe videos, and like all of these new kind of things that were really ripe for parody were just coming into existence. And we got to kind of parody all of them in this really absurd way. And then, on the Clickhole side, our budgets for the videos were $50 each. So it was a lot of, doing every part of the process. Like I would go to Target, I would get the props, I would like get costumes that I would return later. And then we'd just ask for a ton of favors. We shot everything on 5Ds for the most part. And then, I'd edit everything too. So it was this like tight knit video team. And in general, like, the staff at The Onion was all like kind of a really great community. And so it was a really fun time to try things and to kind of learn how to make something with nothing. And from there, I went to Funny or Die. My coworker from The Onion left and then hired me at Funny or Die. And I started there as an editor, editing sketches. And it was sort of, maybe between The Onion and SNL, there's a middle ground that was Funny or Die. To me, the budgets of like a couple $1,000s or at most like $15,000 seemed like this astronomical amount of money to spend on sketches, because I was coming from this $50 a video world. And the thing that was great about Funny or Die was that it was sort of, even though I started as an editor, I knew that I wanted to write and direct. And there at the time that I was there, a pretty open pitching environment. So I just sort of organically was able to kind of make the transition from editing to also writing and directing. And at that time, I was also put in an office with Adriana Cruz, who is actually a Tool director now as well. And we just started giving each other notes on sketches, and then she was an editor as well, and we would kind of cut together just, little bits of pop culture things that would then end up on the website and do really well. And from there, they kind of gave us both more and more responsibility. Our first thing that we got to write and direct was, if you remember the BuzzFeed Tasty videos, it was like there was a camera overhead, and then there was a lot of like hyperlapses, and you'd see how, someone would make like monkey bread or whatever. We did like, an absurd joke version of that, where it would be like how to make milk, and then you'd see the hands like pull apart Oreos and just shave the like white cream into a bowl, and then the hands would add water, and then they'd kind of slosh it around and then pour it into a milk carton. But like that sort of thing. And then we kind of graduated to getting to make sketches with, living, breathing humans in them. But web comedy is very precarious, and that the creative side, the non-branded side of the website, sort of shut down in, I want to say like early 2018 or something. So we got to do that for about 3 years, and then the entire creative staff was laid off, which is sort of just a fact of life for working in web comedy in that time.
Yeah, and to jump in there, I mean, it sounds like the perfect career progression, though, to get where you are now at SNL. Like, I can't imagine better training ground than The Onion, and then Funny or Die, and then now SNL. So, looking back at that time with both The Onion and Funny or Die, what would you say were the key lessons that you learned?
That's a great question. I think that one, starting as an editor was really invaluable to know what pieces are going to be most important. Because getting to SNL, the thing that you don't have is the luxury of time. So you have to make decisions really quickly. You have to be able to look at your shot list and say, I would love to get this shot, but I know that I don't need it to make the joke work. And I think starting and editing and having that grounding really kind of gave me that skill. And then other lessons, I think, at The Onion, I learned the importance of tone, because, when I did the Onion work or Clickhole work, they both were really dependent on their respective tones. Like The Onion, you have to play everything super straight, treat it like a real news, like never hit the joke too hard, always kind of like breeze through the joke. And then at Clickhole, you're kind of like, we were defining this sort of new absurd style. And I think taking the time ahead of time to be like, what should this feel like? And how should that affect our performances? And how do we achieve that through the look and the editing and the music? Those were things I really learned first at The Onion, and then were sort of skills that were enhanced at Funny or Die. And then at Funny or Die, I think one thing I learned that still is, super important to me today is the importance of getting alt jokes on set. Because that also sort of ties back to the edit, but I love to have options in the edit. And sometimes, I think a lesson a lot of people who do comedy have learned is that when everybody's laughing on set, that can be kind of bad news for the edit. Something that might work just with, the people who are sitting around monitor and kind of like riffing might not translate to the finished video. So when you kind of come in with a lot of options, you're sort of building yourself multiple routes to success in the finished product.
That's really interesting because, they always say directing comedy is the hardest directing. So interesting to hear your path and the way that you had these different angles of comedy and these different types of comedy, like the very dry, deadpan, Onion comedy, and then going to Funny or Die, which is probably a little bit more a different style, right?
Totally.
So yeah, that's interesting. And then I also noticed you mentioned you were taking sketch classes. Was that acting classes?
No. I am very much a behind the camera person. Yeah, I was taking sketch writing classes.
Got it.
When I was at school, um, the one form of performance that like kind of everybody was doing was we were all doing these comedic PowerPoints. And that I liked doing. That was sort of the one form of performing I enjoyed where you could kind of play a character, but it was mostly like you had pre-written these jokes and found images that would help kind of like you could play off of. But yeah, I've definitely never really been an actor.
Got it. Yeah. No, I was curious if that was just another way that you honed your craft by actually getting in front of the camera. But no, it makes sense. I'm a behind the camera person as well. And so after working at Funny or Die, eventually you get connected with SNL, which is a dream job for most up and coming directors, especially in the comedy space. So would love to hear the story of how you got that connection and how you started there and what it's been like since then.
Yeah, totally. The story of how I got there was basically that between Funny or Die sort of ending and me starting at SNL, I started at SNL with Adriana Cruz. We started as a team, and then about halfway through our time there, we separated and then started doing our individual work. But our mentor at Funny or Die is this person, Harper Steele, and she was a former SNL head writer and had sort of always thought that we would be great people to be video directors at SNL. And so, you know, she kind of put in the good word, and then we sort of applied through the channel of like agents, and got an interview. Our agents were able to get our reel in front of, you know, the powers that be at SNL. So we got this interview, and the interview process, I think, really varies depending on who you are. I think it's more just like sometimes the show doesn't know whether a position is open until later in the summer. But so we kind of started this process of interviewing, and had one interview probably in July with the person who would be our boss, and then kind of didn't hear anything. And then had another interview with some producers from the show that actually kind of went comically bad, comically poorly, because we were meeting at like a hotel restaurant, and then we got there early, and you know, gave the host our name and then the reservation, and then the host just took the reservation off the system. So we sat down, and then when they arrived, they weren't like, oh yeah, the rest of your party is sitting over there. They were like, oh, we don't have a reservation under this name, but you can come sit on at this other table. So we were just at the same restaurant for like 30 minutes, both being like, wow, these people are so late. And then by the time we all figured it out, they had to leave in like 15 minutes, but we had a good 15-minute conversation. But it definitely felt like, okay, well, there's the end of that dream. And that was sort of confirmed as like the first week of the show was like rapidly approaching. And it was, I think, the Friday of it was the Friday before the first week of work at SNL, and we hadn't heard anything. And so we definitely thought this isn't happening. And then I was on a date at Madame Tussauds, which is LA's hottest date spot. And it's where all the celebrities in LA are. But then I got like an email being like, hey, Lauren wants to meet with you. You'll fly out on Monday morning, have an interview on Tuesday, and then fly back on Wednesday. So that was like a very shocking piece of news, because it was like, oh, I thought they would have surely already hired, you know, the director. But so we flew out on Monday. We interviewed on Tuesday. It's sort of just like everyone describes, where you end up waiting a while. You know, you're told your interview's at 6 p.m. and you actually interview at 9. It's a super short interview. We thought we totally chunked it, but then we got an email at like 1 a.m. being like, stay in New York. We don't know if you got the job, but we know that whatever, you made it to the next step. The next day was Wednesday, and Wednesday's the day that the table read happens, and the sketches that are going to make it to the show are selected. And that morning, we got a call being like, come on over to the table read. You're going to direct something on Friday. So it was really like it was probably the craziest week of my life. We were just really thrown into it. And I think that it might have been less stressful to have a little bit more of like mental time to prepare. But in a way, it was kind of good to just be like, all right, let's do this. And the very first sketch we shot was called A New Kyle. And there's like a lot of sketches where Kyle Mooney, plays a version of himself behind the scenes at the office. And it was just funny because it was like 30 Rock is such a confusing building. And we were shooting in 30 Rock. So like trying to move from location to location, like we would get lost, and we would splinter off, and to save time, each direct a different scene in a different, a different floor of the office. And then I remember there's one moment where we were calling each other being like, where are you? And then the person next to me was like, we're by the studio elevators. And I was like, we're by the studio elevators. And then Adriana's like, how would I know what the studio elevators are? So it was really, just being thrown in there in kind of every way you could imagine.
Yeah. And walk me through just like, what were those emotions like? I mean, to just be flown out to New York, interview, and then a day later, it's like, okay, you're working for SNL. Like you're going to be directing something for SNL.
I mean, there almost wasn't time to feel any emotions. I think it was like, because there was just so much to kind of take care of, like just from the fact of like being like, oh, I really want to do a good job directing this piece. And I also have never worked with a budget this big or like a crew this big. And so all of that, like just kind of practically handling that. And then there's the smaller stuff in your head that's like, oh, I just learned that you're supposed to dress up on Saturdays at work, but I only brought 3 days of clothes. I thought I was going to fly back to LA and, have a chance to like move out, but that's not a thing. So there's also being like, I'm working these long hours, but I'm going to try to sneak out to like a store to buy an outfit to wear on Saturday. And like, I need to like order underwear online, like things like that. So I think after the first 3 weeks of work, when I was able to like fly back to LA and then actually move out, it all sort of then hit me like, the kid in me was just like, in complete disbelief of being like, wow, I'm like working at this institution that, I've loved my entire life.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. And so one thing we really like to focus on this show is process and really understanding your creative process, how these ideas come to life. And I think as well, like the process within SNL, because I'm sure it's a bit of a crazy process inside those walls. So would love to hear just granularly, what is it, first of all, what does it look like inside SNL? Maybe take us through day by day or even hour by hour, the process of coming up with an idea and producing it and getting it on air.
Totally. Well, so at SNL, I was strictly a director, not a writer. So my part of the process would start on Wednesday. When I first started, I was doing promos. So like that would be Monday and Tuesday. You'd kind of shoot a mini sketch with the host. But then that kind of is a torch that gets passed to the newer directors as you kind of move up, I guess. So my process at SNL, which has also really, I think, influenced my process as a commercial director and, working with Tool, is sort of, the thing you don't have, like I mentioned before, is time. So my part of the process would start on Wednesday, and around noon, I would receive like 6 to 12 scripts that were written as pre-taped sketches. And I'd read all of them. And then in my head, I would come up with like a plan, like a brief sort of plan for all of them. Like I would look up some visual references. If it was a music video, I'd watch some music videos that came to mind and kind of just pull some stills. For film stills, I use this website, Shot Deck. It's an amazing resource. It has like thousands and thousands and thousands of film stills. So if you know, I want to pull from this movie, if you're lucky and the movie's on there, that's great. Or if you're like, I know I want to shoot anamorphic, I want to shoot, this type of lighting and whatever, you can filter by like, the composition style and everything like that too, which can be hugely helpful. So I kind of put together some references.
And sorry to just jump in. So you use that for putting together like essentially like a visual treatment or look and feel?
Yes. Yeah. And, the timeline is so quick that you're not actually doing a formal treatment. At SNL, it's just ideas. It's like getting a visual conversation started, even if it's just with yourself. And part of it is also like, at that stage, you don't know what's going to get picked. What you think is going to get picked is often subverted. And so there's a little bit of a self-protective measure there to be like, oh, I read these 12 sketches and I love this one. And like, I have a million ideas for this one. But then there's another part of you that's like, based on experience, I don't want to go too far down this road because there's a superstitious aspect too, where you're like, if I do, it won't happen. And specifically with like my production designer, we had kind of jokes about that, where we'd go back and forth with ideas. We'd get really excited. And then that one wouldn't get picked. And we'd be like, why did we do that? Like, we jinxed it again. But yeah, so kind of that initial ideation phase that's like trying not to invest too much of myself into it, but trying to have ideas at the ready, in case that's the one that gets picked. And then the table read happens. It was usually supposed to start at 3 and end around 7 or 8. It got pushed later and later and later.
And sorry to jump in, what day are we on here? Is this still Wednesday?
It's still Wednesday. Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
It's still Wednesday. It's just like all the sketches are being read and then they're picked. And then I get a phone call about an hour after the table read ends, or a text that's just like, you're doing this one. And then from there, it's off to the races. So the reason you have those preliminary notes is that you're going to jump on a call in 10 minutes with all the department heads, the writers, and you're going to say, here's what the wigs are going to look like. We're building a set. It should look like this. Here are the references. Then like, from the production side, they're going to be like, well, you really need like 7 sets. And then you're like, well, yeah, that's what's in the script. If we want to do it this way, we need 7 sets. And there's a little push and pull that way. And yeah, you're just kind of like throwing out like preliminary direction for everyone, because from that point on, somebody is staying up all night. There's someone awake at every hour between then and when the sketch airs on Saturday to make it happen. But sometimes, you have your little ideas that you've written for all the pre-tape sketches, but sometimes they'll say, actually, we're going to pick this live sketch that was read, and then we need to kind of translate it into a film piece. So then you just have those 10 minutes between when it gets picked and everyone gets on the call to sort of jot down those ideas. And I think that's the thing that was like maybe the biggest learning curve, because usually you have more than 10 minutes to think of like, what your vision as a director is going to be. But it does really hone your instincts. And I think, when I get boards for a commercial, I'm like immediately like, the ideas are like, the directions are sort of coming out naturally, and I'll jot down some notes. And that's something I'm super grateful for from SNL, as stressful as it was at the time, or could be. It's a really intense kind of training ground to be like, how do you make decisions fast? And so I'm super grateful to that. But yeah, so from there you have one prep day typically, and it's Thursday. So before the pandemic, we would shoot on location a lot and then do some set builds. After the pandemic, just because of, all of the variabilities with COVID, we would build sets every week. and very rarely shoot on location. But so before the pandemic, you would location scout on Thursday morning, pick a location, and then shot list, do all of your prep. Like you're checking in with the art department, making sure all the props are looking good. And at a place like SNL, props can be the thing that makes or breaks a sketch, because it could be a commercial parody for a thing that doesn't exist. And there are all sorts of like super talented artists working around the clock, building a toilet that does a million things. And I say toilet because there are many toilet sketches. I think if you go on YouTube, you can probably watch a whole playlist of SNL toilet sketches. But it's actually takes a ton of artistry and expertise to be able to like accomplish that in the amount of time. And I've just been absolutely blown away by the things that the SNL crews can do. It's like insane, honestly.
Yeah.
Especially that like little kid in me being like showing up to set and then, seeing this world that was created overnight. It's like absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just kind of diving back into the process. Thursday, you're scouting, you're shot listing, you have all of your references. It's just like prep. But then sometime between noon and 4 p.m., you go to a rewrite table for your sketch. And that's a place where anything can change in the sketch, from a joke, dialogue, whatever, to maybe this shouldn't actually take place in a theater and it should take place in a classroom, or like it should take place in someone's house. And then, as the director, I'm like thinking about what we have and I want to be able to say yes every single time. So then afterwards, it becomes this second round of prep where you take what you already have and see how you can retrofit it to adapt to how the script has changed over the course of the day. And that's another thing that like created some stressful moments on a day-to-day level, but then it creates this like problem-solving ability as a director that I think is hard to come by elsewhere, because you just have to be able to adapt to kind of survive and make the thing you want to make. And it's just amazing, some of the things that feel like they're impossible that then are achieved by the next day, Yeah,
it's pretty incredible the pace of that production can really be done at when it needs to be done that fast.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know like your creative process. Like I assume you're not storyboarding here,
No.
animatics or anything like that.
Right.
So I mean, is the shooting style very run and gun? Is your shot list pretty loose, or what does your prep look like?
So yeah, my shot listing, I would I love to shot list with the DP, because you don't have enough time to like do it on your own and then like chat. Like we would sit down for a couple hours on Thursday and then kind of just go through, like talk through shots. Occasionally, like I would use this program Shot Designer, where you do overheads just for blocking, especially in big group scenes. Basically, there's just like a little dot for each person, and you can like make them move from point A to point B. You can add cameras and add camera moves. So that can be really helpful, especially like I was saying, when there's like a lot of dialogue and there's like 6 people, just being like knowing where everyone is and kind of like keeping track of the line. But then otherwise, like there's also this like previs program called Satellite 3D that my DP would kind of like work with while we were talking through shots, and we'd sort of try to storyboard that way. But there just wasn't enough time to do everything. So we just got a couple hero setups kind of planned out. And then the thing is, though, everything has to be built to be flexible, because when you're shooting, you're also dealing with the studio schedule of like the rehearsals of the live shows. And as soon as those are thrown off, then you might get cast members at different times than you expected to, and they might not be together if, as you expected them to be. So you have to be able to like take what you planned and take, that like crane shot that like you were really excited about, and figure out a way to make it work where now the 2 people aren't right next to each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, so process wise, like I would plan as much as I possibly could, basically. And I would do, I would write these really detailed shot lists, usually in like an Excel spreadsheet that had like, the size and the angle and a description and whatever, like, how the camera would move and, maybe what we'd intercut it with. And then on set, I have that up in my iPad and I'm crossing things off or consolidating, because sometimes you get to set and you see, maybe shot 1 and shot 4 are accomplishing the same thing. And if I had all the time in the world, I'd love them both, but let's just combine them for the sake of this. Or we can add a move to shot 1 and then it feels like shot 4.
And just to jump in here, do you have any of these you could share, like either the visualization tools or maybe a shot list or something like that?
Cool. Yeah. So this is Shot Designer, where you can, work on overheads. But yeah, so you'd be like, we'll have a conversation here. This is Nate. This is Hannah. And this is, our friend. And then we can add cameras. You can add a camera move. I already have this move here from, 1 to 2. And then you can also add blocking. Let's say Nate's going to walk over there and leave the room. Sometimes like I would just use it to get the like true basics of the blocking down. And in relation to camera and camera blocking, but you can also add lights, and you can, sometimes I would put the, we'd have our overhead of the set from the production designer, and I just put that in, and then you can actually, put the characters in space, and see where you maybe want them to be. So it's a super helpful tool.
I like it a lot. It almost serves the same purpose as storyboarding, but much quicker, right? It seems like that's the name of the game here.
Well, that's the thing where it's like you can block out an entire scene at once, as opposed to, and then be like camera here, camera here, camera here. Those are your shots, as opposed to then being like, I need to draw each individual frame. You're like, I know the axis. I know, like in my head, I know the whether it's a low angle shot or a high angle shot, whether the camera's moving, and where the camera's going to be in relation to the talent. So that's super helpful.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to, pivot on that plan too. So that's like, I feel like you could probably just hear it in the way I'm talking, but I'm just like so used to just like changing on the fly that like I love these tools, but also a lot of it just comes together on the day.
Awesome. And then once you get into production, like I guess just quickly kind of walk me through how a shoot goes. Does it feel more rushed than if you're doing a commercial shoot? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, the timeline is always, you always have less time than you want. It really just depends on the availability of the cast and the host and the level of ambition of the project itself. Because sometimes, you have to decide, do I want more performance or do I want more coverage? Do I want to take the time to set up this really cool crane shot, or do I want to shoot on Steadicam and kind of replicate it a little bit more on the fly? So it's a lot of kind of adjusting as the day goes, but I think, I always felt like so nervous, like during prep and kind of thinking about all the ways certain things could go wrong. And of course, sometimes stuff went wrong, but usually the shoot was my favorite part. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of also the chance, like I mentioned before, where you get to try out alts, you get to see kind of like the performances come together, and that's like just so fun at a place like SNL, where you're working with these incredibly talented people who kind of take something to, a level beyond where you could have imagined it.
I wanted to check in. What day are we on here in this timeline, by the way?
So that's Friday. And then, you're either shooting, typically, you could be shooting anytime on Friday, like, starting at 7 a.m. and then wrapping at 2, or starting at 11 p.m. and wrapping at 4 a.m. And then you'll go in for editing the next morning, and you edit all day until you have to have kind of a finished enough version by dress rehearsal, which starts at 8:30. And then, it's the really nerve-wracking part where you watch the audience watch your sketch, and you watch Lauren watch your sketch. It's like that famous thing of like under the bleachers. and then Lauren gives you notes, and then you have the time between the end of dress rehearsal, but between when your sketch airs at dress rehearsal to the time it's about 5 minutes before it's going to go on the air for the real show to make those changes. And that can be complicated because one thing that can shift between dress and air is that the order of the sketches might change. So, if you were somebody who went and sat in the audience for dress rehearsal one time and then you watch the show, it wouldn't look exactly the same. And that's cool. It's like fun when your sketch gets moved up earlier. But it also means you have less time to make those changes. So that's the final sprint there at the end. And then you get to actually watch the thing be on TV, and then it's on to the next week. So that's kind of that's the schedule there. But I did 4 years there, and then I left in May, and I missed the adrenaline rush. But then it's also probably physically better for my body.
Yeah, it's like a 48-hour film festival every weekend, right? And
Yeah.
I can imagine the pressure before your skit's about to go live on the air. I mean, you're probably watching the edit over and over, like praying there's not like an unlinked media file or something
Oh yeah.
before it goes live, right?
Yeah, well, the post team is incredible at SNL, and the VFX people are able to make these kind of insane things happen in such short timelines. But sometimes, there's a week where there's 3 pieces that all have huge post needs, and you go to dress and there's still like one comp that isn't finalized or something, and it usually, in my head, I'm like, oh my god, it's going to take the audience out of it, but people just don't usually notice that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, thank you for walking us through that process. I mean, it sounds like such an exciting pace of production. So yeah, next would love to hear about what's next for you and what you're working on these days. I know you have a new project in development with Paramount Pictures. You are repped by Tool as a commercial director. Would love to hear what's next.
So I've been doing a lot of work with Tool that has been really fun. I most recently worked on this Hotels.com campaign with, it was in partnership with the NBA, and it was with Sam Richardson and Ike Barinholtz. And they play like these hotel guys who, work at a hotel and then are kind of like nerding out on basketball and hotel stuff. And that was super fun. Those were just recently released. So I'm doing a lot of exciting stuff over at Tool, and hope to continue to do that stuff. And then I am attached as a director to the Paramount movie that's slowly moving along, and that's kind of a big comedy. And then I'm also attached as a director to an indie movie that I love that is kind of also marching along the indie path, and we're hoping to lock in funding soon, and fingers crossed one of those goes into production in 2023. So those are kind of the big things, and then I'm writing and pitching a project with Adriana that was based on a short we made back in 2018, and then I'm just trying to kind of get some stuff off the ground. My spouse is a writer, and we love to work on stuff together. So we're putting together a pitch for a TV show idea right now, and I think we'd love to be working together. I think that'd be really cool. So those are some of the things, but mostly just trying to keep as many balls in the air as possible.
Yeah.
It's kind of what I love about doing commercial work is that it's sort of you can do it while you're doing all this other stuff, and it's like I just love getting back on set. When I'm working on this bigger long-term project, I really miss being on set, and then I get to do a commercial, and I get to work with a great crew and make something happen, and then I kind of get that refreshed feeling again.
Yeah, it's great to hone your craft and get on those sets and experiment and try things that maybe you'll bring to life in your next feature, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I've just been so lucky to work with amazing DPs and production designers and, amazing folks on the agency side too, who want to make something really special. And I think there is a little bit of that aspect of SNL where it's like you pour your heart into something for a short burst of time and then it's over, and you can try it, one style and really lean into it and then do something else on the next thing. So it's such a nice balance to, working in really like immersing yourself in like a feature where, you're living in one world for such a long period of time, which is like great in its own right. But that balance is pretty wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I'd love walking through and learning more about the crazy world there over at SNL behind the scenes, and very excited to see what's next for you in your career.
Thanks, Nate. Yeah, I really appreciate the time and had a great time chatting with you.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and comment to help us spread the word. You can also find more insider content on the Assemble blog, and you can find me on all channels at Nate Watkin. And don't forget, if your producing team is in need of a project management solution, try Assemble today to streamline your production workflow. Our listeners received their first month free by utilizing the code OFFSCRIPT, that's one word, at checkout. You have been listening to the Creatives Off Script podcast hosted by Assemble.